All right, history. I'm going out of order today on the videos that I'm making because I have to do the English one and I really need to get my thoughts wrapped around my favorite book and opinion details about my favorite book. So I'm going to do history next and we are going to do some review. But first, let's go over our targets. Our targets for this lesson are: I can identify Penn's plans for Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, and I can apply Penn's ideas by creating a city plan. Now, we have been talking about the middle colonies this week. In the last chapter, I cannot do this, we talked about the New England colonies, and those were Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. There were 4. And they were all started by Puritans and Pilgrims and mostly people from England who were escaping so that they could have religious freedom. Remember, the Puritans wanted to purify the Church of England, but the Pilgrims wanted to have freedom of religion from the Church of England. So now we're moving down to the middle colonies. Remember, Henry Hudson sailed in 1609, right after the founding of Jamestown. That's why I keep telling you, these are not in the order that they were founded, but he sailed in about 1609 and wanted to find a way to get to Asia like every other explorer had done, and instead ran into the New World, which was just North America, and he sailed up into the river and found Manhattan, and he claimed it for the Dutch. And about 15 years later, they came back over and they settled in this top pink area that says New York and New Jersey, and they named it New Amsterdam because they settled it for the Dutch. But then the Duke of York from England came over with his warships, and the Dutch said, well, we're not prepared to fight, and they allowed the English to take over. Well, the Duke of York said, this is too much territory for me to handle. So he took the top half and named it New York, and then the bottom half he gave to 2 of his friends, and they called it New Jersey. Now, yesterday we talked about William Penn, and William Penn sailed over and he settled Pennsylvania. And Pennsylvania was settled by a group of people called Quakers, and they were treated badly in their country of England because they didn't believe in the Bible itself. They believed in an inner light that may not have always agreed with what God's Word said, and God's Word is always true. And this is Tubby. I don't think you can see him. Well, I was going to let you see him, but I can't figure out how to get the camera there. But this is Tubby sitting beside me purring in case you hear that noise. But anyway, William Penn founded the colony of Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania was actually 2 words, Pennsylvania, which meant Penn's wood. Now today we're going to talk more about the planning of the main city in Pennsylvania called Philadelphia. But remember, when Penn formed Pennsylvania, he didn't just allow the Quakers in, he allowed the Swedish, the Dutch, and the German to live in Pennsylvania. And they did not all have the same religious beliefs, but they all had religious freedom in the colony. So here we go with William Penn. We're on page 120, and we're going to talk about planning the city of Philadelphia. So if you'll read along with me, William Penn grew up in a wealthy English family. He had a college education. He was handsome. He wore fine clothes, and he loved to go to parties. But he changed his ways when he became a Quaker. You know, he kind of reminds me of the Puritans because they were educated and wore colorful clothes. Now, I don't know about loving to go to parties, but Quakers believe people should dress plainly and live a simple life. Penn preached and wrote about his new religion. A few times he was even put in jail for for preaching, because remember, in England, the Quakers were not treated nicely. On 121, when Penn was granted the land of Pennsylvania, he began making plans. He wanted the colony to be a safe place for everyone. He wanted everyone to be free to choose how to worship. He drew up plans for the city called Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. And it's still known as that today. Philo means love. Important buildings would be at the center of town. Homes would have their own gardens and fields. Wide streets left room for the city to grow. Penn had married a Quaker girl named Gully. He had to leave her and their children behind when he sailed for Pennsylvania. He arrived in 1682. A small group of colonists who had come ahead of Penn were already building Philadelphia. Penn built a house of his own, but he never spent much time living in it. He soon had to return to England. He had to settle problems about his land, and his wife was ill. The problems dragged on for many years. During that time, Penn's wife, Gully, died. William Penn returned to Pennsylvania in 1699 with his second wife, Hannah. They were able to stay for only 2 years. But Penn saw that the colony had grown. Philadelphia was a large, busy city of several thousand people. Penn's plan for the city had been a success. Okay, so on page 120, there is a copy of the actual map that William Penn used to build Philadelphia. The original map is a primary source because it was made by Penn in 1682. That means that it's the original. It's not a copy, it's not a replica, it's the actual map that he used. William Penn planned the city of Philadelphia while he was living in England. In his plan, the houses would be built on large areas of green grass with gardens. He wanted living in the city of Philadelphia to be like living in the country. Since most of the men would be tradesmen, the city must be built near a river. Okay, now let's think back to their means of travel back in the 1600s. Why do you think Mr. Penn planned to locate the city near a river? Well, it's because the tradesmen would need to ship the things they made back to Europe, and people would need fresh water. So you needed it to be near a river for 2 reasons. 1, for water to drink, because you're not going to drink salt water. And 2, they needed a waterway to be able to sail in and out and take their crafts back over to Europe to sell. How do we know that Penn's plan was successful? Because Philadelphia grew into a large, busy city of several thousand people. So, your task today in your, there it is right there, activity book, you have this, and then you have these buildings. Your job, if you choose to do it, is to plan your own city of Philadelphia and how you would put the buildings. Now remember, it says that he felt that, homes would have their own gardens and fields. Important buildings would be at the center of town. So when you're looking at these buildings, the important buildings need to be in the middle, and then the homes, I would guess, need to be around it. So your job is to lay out the city the way that you think it should be built to be successful. On page 121, the blue arrow asks, what city in Pennsylvania did William Penn plan? And the answer is Philadelphia. All right, so just a little bit of information about William Penn. He was born into an Anglican family, but became a Quaker when he was 22. He is best known for founding the Pennsylvania colony based on liberty and equal rights, which he called his holy experiment. Penn inherited his father's wealthy English estate. Since the king owed money to his father, William was awarded land in America for payment. The prospects of a better life for Quakers in the New World became a reality. Penn dreamed of a civil society of men enjoying the highest possible degree of freedom and happiness. Penn's ideas of freedom and good relations with Native Americans were key factors in fulfilling his dream. Penn planned that the city of Philadelphia would be far superior to the crowded and depressed cities of England. He designed a city with wider streets and enough land for family gardens. The last years of his life were disappointing to him. He suffered from debt, false legal accusations, and colonial dissatisfaction. Penn died on July 30, 1718. So he had this great plan, and the city did become very successful, but Penn never got to really enjoy the success of his city. Now, I do want to go back and just remind you that the middle colonies had fertile soil. They were able to grow an abundance of crops. They were able to breed and raise animals, and they built barrels and they built wagons, and they were able to use those for trade. The middle colonies became known as the bread basket because they were able to grow barley, wheat, and oats for all of the colonies ultimately. I also want to go over the questions that you had yesterday on your little workbook page on 121. It says the Quakers trusted in the blank more than the Bible, and it was the inner light. The Quakers were blank in England, and it was not treated well. The King of England gave William Penn's family land in America. William Penn paid the blank for the land, the Indians, and that's something that we have seen in both middle colonies. Henry Hudson paid the Lenape for the land that they settled on in Manhattan, and William Penn paid the Indians for the land that he was already given by the king, but really, it didn't belong to the king necessarily because he was in England. We just discovered this new land. And then William Penn made blank a place of religious freedom, and that is Pennsylvania. At the bottom of the page, it said to circle the name of those who had religious freedom in Pennsylvania. You should have circled English, Dutch, Swedish, and German, because all people, no matter where you were from, had religious freedom in Pennsylvania. I hope that you were able to watch the little video yesterday, especially on how Manhattan has changed since Henry Hudson discovered it, because when Henry Hudson discovered it, it was nothing but grass and trees. There may have been a few Native American homes, but there was nothing compared to what the city looks like today. I can't remember off the top of my head if there is a video clip to go with this lesson, but if there is, I'll attach it to the information I sent home to your parents today. But please do enjoy planning your own city, and I would love to see what your layout was. So if you have a chance, shoot me a picture. Have your parents to shoot me a picture of how you decided the best way was to plan your city. And I will get to work on the English video as soon as I can find my favorite book, because I'll be honest, I'm not sure where it is. All right, I'll talk to you again in a few minutes.